Hi, Jay. Welcome to the sisterhood.
Thank you so much for having me.
How does that feel to have someone welcome you into the sisterhood?
And no one's ever done that before, so
Yeah.
it's a first. And yeah, I'm honored.
Mhm. Well, thank you for joining us for the healthy way. I think you have a lot to say about a topic that many of us step into a new year and say, I want to do things differently. I don't like the way that 2022 went in this area. And we're going to be talking about technology and tech use. And I think you can give us some practical help, but maybe give us some theological framework too, as we consider what does this mean to be faithful people who live in a world where technology exists, and how can we not be afraid and also be wise as
Mm,
we use the tools that are available to us in a way that they have never been available to people before. But before we jump into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as far as where you're located
mhm.
and what you do for work, how you spend your days,
Yep.
maybe who you live with. And I also think the place where you are
Yeah.
informs some of your perspective on this topic of technology.
Yeah. Yeah. I love so much of what you said there about fear and wisdom. Yeah. And really looking forward to getting into some of that. But yeah, thanks again for having me on. My name is Jay. I'm a husband and a dad, married to my wife Jenny. We just celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary, and it's flown by. It's kind of weird to say 14 years. Oh my gosh. We've got two little kids, a 7-year-old daughter and then a 4-year-old son. So our life is kind of in the throes of early parenthood, and their lives are getting crazy now. Soccer and dance and football, all those things are happening, so we're kind of in the midst of that, but it's a joy and a gift. And yeah, my sort of 9 to 5, I guess, I serve as a pastor of a local church here in town, and a fairly, decently large local church here in town, sort of multi-site church, and serve as the lead pastor here. And uh, the church is located in the heart of Silicon Valley. So this is where I've been basically my entire life. I wasn't born here, but I moved here when I was 4. So I've lived here all nearly 4 decades. So it's my life. This is home. I never left. I left for little spurts, several months here and there, but never really left. This is where I've grown up and have chosen to raise our family. So yeah, right in the heart of Silicon Valley. Our church, my office, kind of where I'm sitting right now, is about 10 minutes away from the main office of Apple, like the big giant spaceships that a lot of people have seen. We're like 15-20 minutes from Google, another 10 minutes from there to, Meta, Facebook, all that. So yeah, I'm surrounded by tech culture, which is a part of, it's certainly my location, and my own personal history has certainly informed the way I think about, and just the very fact that I often think about technology and technology's formational effects on us, particularly on those of us who are Christians, who are followers of Jesus. What that means is that we long to be formed into Christ likeness. And so I have asked the question quite a bit in recent years, actually, about how maybe subtly and dangerously we might be in the process of being formed into things that are not like Christ, because of all of these technologies that are so pervasive and ubiquitous in our lives. But at the same time, like you said, it's not about fear. People have a misunderstanding, maybe because of the title of my books, that I'm a Luddite, that I think everyone should throw away technology and live on a farm and churn their own butter or something. And if that's the life you're called to, great. But I'm not, anti-technology in any way. I actually have a great appreciation for technology. I just think it's important that we are thoughtful about our engagement with technology. So there you go. That's a little bit about me.
It's so helpful to, I think, just hear you frame it in that way. And of course, where you live informs your perspective. And I was thinking about when you were talking, maybe in your area, people are a little more sensitive because of where you live to the topic. And how am I, as someone who wants to grow as a disciple of Christ, how am I using technology and for good or for ill?
Yeah.
But I wonder if a lot of us just don't even ask that question, unless there's like very kind of overtly things we're doing on our technology that we know, okay, this probably isn't the greatest thing. But for those of us who are just scrolling social media, who are, constantly being interrupted by our phones, who are constantly checking our phones, I'm not sure that a lot of us are even asking that question. So where do we begin in that?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It's such a wonderful question. You said what I would say, which is, how are you using the technology? But I would take it a step further and encourage people to ask the question, is the technology using me in any way? And the answer, at least on the surface, is almost always no. At least we think no. But when you dig a little bit deeper, you think about, maybe levels of anxiety or addiction. And here's the thing with digital technology, social media in particular, they're non-neutral technologies. So we are fooling ourselves if we think that when we open whatever social media app we open or news media app or whatever, if we believe we are engaging in a neutral technology in which I have total control and the technology itself has no intended goal other than to offer itself as a technology to me. If we believe that, then we're fooling ourselves. They're non-neutral technologies. And that's not just conjecture. It's not sort of a hypothesis. At this point in human history, we have more than enough data points that tell us social media, news media, digital technologies in general, and big tech in particular. By big tech, I mean companies like, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it might be. And I'm not bashing those companies directly. I'm just stating what's the obvious, what's been proven. They are non-neutral. Their business models are built, like the companies are built on you continuing to scroll, to swipe, to click. That's what keeps the lights on for these companies. That's not necessarily bad. Where it gets dangerous is in addition to that, what has also been substantiated is that the best way to keep human beings swiping, scrolling, clicking, liking, sharing, retweeting is to rile us up in any number of ways. So there's a lot of data now that shows, for example, outrage is one of the most effective mechanisms to keep us online. So then as Christians, we have to ask the question, is outrage or rage a fruit of the Spirit? Is that what Christ-likeness looks like? And then the answer very quickly and obviously becomes, well, no, actually, the scriptures tell us that the fruit of the Spirit includes things like gentleness and kindness and goodness. So then we have to ask the question, how much of that is being cultivated in me as I mediate my life online? And if and when we find that things like, for example, gentleness, kindness, goodness, self-control, if those things are being undone in us, in part because of our digital proclivities, then we have a real dilemma here, and in some ways a sobering truth that the technologies are forming us, and in other words, the technologies are using us in ways that we don't really want to be formed nor used. So I think that's where we have to begin. We have to begin with a real assessment of ourselves and who we are becoming, and then ask the question, how is my digital engagement informing and forming my journey as a disciple of Jesus into Christ likeness?
You mentioned earlier that there's kind of a subtlety and dangerous element that we don't even know it's happening.
Yeah.
How do you talk with people in your congregation about the discernment process of knowing, because I think we just think I'm just looking at that, and we don't realize what's happening in our hearts or in our bodies where we're carrying that tension and that stress. What ways should we be discerning how technology is forming us?
Yeah. For me, I've mentioned it already, but for me, Paul's words in Galatians 5, his famous words about the fruit of the Spirit and these characteristics of the fruit of the Spirit have been so helpful for me. So this has been sort of the paradigm through which I've asked that question of myself and have asked our people to ask that question of themselves. So Galatians 5, right? Paul says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. So the question I am constantly trying to ask, especially when I engage digital technologies and social media. And by the way, again, this is not some sort of blanket statement against these things. I have social media. I use social media. I'm online. I check my email. We're having this conversation because of the gift that is digital technology. So I'm not against these technologies. It's really not even a problem with the technology itself. It's a human problem. It's our lack of awareness, our lack of discipline, our lack of wherewithal and resilience, to make sure that we leverage the technologies rather than allowing the technologies to leverage us. So to do that for me, I've used Paul's words in Galatians 5:22 and 23 as the paradigm. And I will often ask myself, is my engagement on social media, is my engagement online, is it cultivating more or less love in me? More or less joy, peace? Am I becoming more or less patient as I continue to scroll and swipe and click? More or less kindness or goodness? Am I developing deep faithfulness to the people I am called to? Am I gentle online? Am I self-controlled online? And very quickly, the answers become very obvious when I use that as a paradigm. So that's been immensely practically helpful for me. And then once I have a clear answer, like, you know what? I feel this is a real life example for me. There was a season of my life, I'm still on Twitter, but there was a season of my life where I was checking Twitter incessantly. And it got to a point where I realized very clearly, using that paradigm, you know what? I am not a joyful person, and I am not a person of peace on Twitter. It's making me actually quite impatient. I'm not gentle, and I think I'm addicted. I'm losing self-control. So then I took practical measures. I deleted Twitter from my phone, which was almost 99% of the time. I never checked Twitter on my laptop. It was always on my phone. So I deleted it from my phone. I set very strong limits on when I would go on Twitter. And now one of those limits is unless somebody tags me, or unless I'm posting something, I don't scroll. I don't just mindlessly scroll to see what's on the Twitter feed. I don't do that anymore. And it's easier not to do that because I don't have it on my phone. I have to actually go on my laptop and type it in and log in and then do the thing. So, and then, another commitment I made was, maybe I'll use Twitter sometimes to share some of the work that I'm doing. But outside of that, I've sort of committed, I'm only going to share like brief snippets of thoughts that I think could bring about goodness in people's lives or an encouragement or something like that. So I post those sorts of things and then just log out. So that's a real life example of how this has worked for me. And it really was, considering my addiction to that particular social media app, against the backdrop of a life of the Spirit and what the life of the Spirit should cultivate in me.
I'm reading the book Unoffendable right now, and I love that book. And one of the things that is just like, he's a very funny writer, but one of the things he says is that, for example, if someone else cuts you off in traffic, you may say, oh my gosh, that guy is he uses the word idiot. I mean, that guy's such an idiot. But then when you cut someone else off in traffic, you say, well, that was an honest mistake. Well, I didn't mean to do that. Right. And we immediately, so what he's saying is that we are very bad judges sometimes of our own motives and behaviors.
Yeah.
And And I was thinking about that when you were talking, that we can say, well, that person's addicted to social media, or my child even is using this in this way. But in some ways, we're very bad judges of our own use and our own addiction and our own lack of fruit of the spirit, because we tend to be a little bit more judgmental of other people and have more of the grace card with ourselves. And so we don't always honestly look at it. And one of the things that really changed my perspective on this was when I heard the term product, that for the first time in history, because of the way social media works, we are literal products. Every one of us has become a product. And that was sobering to me. It somehow, I don't know why, but it somehow kind of woke me up that I am not just a person scrolling on this. I'm actually a product of all of these companies, and a product of that they are using, that I'm a product to be used on this platform. And so just talk a little bit more about even that dynamic.
Yeah, that's great. I totally agree. A lot of people, I think, not everybody, but a lot of people have either seen or at least heard about the Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. It was like the #1 documentary on Netflix for several months running, a year or two ago when it came out. And one of the main voices, one of the main people featured in that documentary is a man named Tristan Harris, who, he's not a Christian. I don't think he's a Christian, but Tristan Harris is a design ethicist. So he talks a lot about the ethics of digital design. And his story is very public. He was hired as a design ethicist at Google. And again, I have friends that work at Google. I use Google, so I'm not bashing the company necessarily. This is just Tristan Harris's story. He was hired as a design ethicist at Google. And essentially what that meant was they hired him to make sure that Google was designing in an ethical way, considering the ways in which their company and their website and all of their stuff, their products, would the ethics behind those things and how it might be affecting people. And he resigned that position shortly after and publicly stated that he resigned because to design ethically would cost Google too much on their bottom line. And so he realized he was hired really essentially just as a sort of show, like, hey, we care about ethics. But he came out publicly and he said, no, really don't. It affects the bottom line too much. So now he has a podcast and several other things that he does. I say all of that to say that's where the idea first gained national exposure. Tristan Harris was the first person several years ago who said, and this has been just like you, this is so sobering to me the first time I heard it. I'm paraphrasing him here, but basically he said, most people think that social media apps are free. You go to the app store on your phone and you type in whatever, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, whatever it is, Snapchat, whatever. And you press the download button and it charges you nothing, right? It costs you nothing. It's free. So then he said, and continues to say, nothing is free. If something is free to you, then you are the product. That's what Tristan Harris is the first person who said that. And then it changed everything. And now in subsequent years, what we have discovered is that is literally true. The way the business model works is I said this earlier, the longer and more vociferously we engage on these apps and these platforms, the more money the company makes. So just do the simple math. If that is true, and it is true, then their business is designed to work toward your addiction and your allegiance. That's what they need. The more addicted you are, the more deeply aligned and committed you are to these platforms and these apps, these social media apps, the more money it makes the company. And these are for-profit companies, that want to make money. That's how they stay in business. So yeah, that's exactly right. You are the product. And the danger in that, there's so many dangers in that. But one of the dangers in that, I think, is what you said earlier, about that book and about, oh, they cut me off, they're an idiot, I cut someone else off. honest mistake. There's another book that reminds me of by Malcolm Gladwell, a book called Talking to Strangers.
Yes.
And
Love it.
he's got this fantastic quote in that book. He says, I have it up here. He says, we think we can easily see into the hearts of others based on the flimsiest of clues. We jump at the chance to judge strangers, but we would never do that to ourselves. We are nuanced and complex and enigmatic, but the stranger is easy, right? And I think online, relationships and interactions mediated online perpetuates that lie, because when you are scrolling whatever, or you're engaging digitally, the only physically tactile, like literally real human in that interaction for you is you. Everybody else is a digital avatar. Intellectually, there's a real human on the other side of that digital screen, but in real time, in the room, you're sitting alone in your body, looking at digital ones and zeros that represent human beings. And it becomes so easy to forget that's a real human being, flesh and blood, just like you, right? Made in the image of God, loved by God. And then it becomes really easy to begin treating them as something less than fully, totally human like you. And I think that happens all the time. It's one of the reasons why we are neck deep in outrage culture today, because it's really easy to yell and scream and call each other names and just completely destroy one another when you're not face to face. I mean, people say the most shocking, horrifying things online, things that 95% of those people would never say in person. And there's a real danger in that. Not only are we the products, we now begin to see other human beings as products, as commodities, and we treat them as such. We treat them as less than human, less than beloved sons and daughters of God. And another danger in that is, not only is that dehumanizing to the person, that is dehumanizing to you. To treat another human that way actually dehumanizes you. You become less than the person God has called you to be. So it's just this incredibly dangerous and violent vortex of dehumanization. And I think we have to really be aware of that anytime we interact online.
Okay, so that feels scary and sad and hard and true. It all feels true as well. So how do we move forward if we want to use the technology in a healthy way? What are some things we can do? I mean, one thing I hear you say is maybe being with people face to face as an anecdote to living a life of screens. But what can we do as followers of Christ to use technology in a way that is redemptive and in a way that not only protects us from the negative, but actually uses it for good?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, maybe the key question to ask. And I would say, one, it begins with an honest assessment of your own addictions. Most addicts don't admit that they're addicts. But what the data shows us is that most Americans are addicted to digital devices. So Apple just released some data a couple of years ago that the average iPhone user locks and unlocks their phone more than 80 times a day. The average smartphone user touches their phone, like physically touches their phone, a tap, a swipe, an opening, a click, a whatever, physically touches their phone. This is crazy. More than 2,600 times a day.
Oh my gosh.
And like, that sounds insane to us. It's like, oh my gosh, all those crazy people. I would encourage you, take 1 hour of your life tomorrow and count just within 1 hour how many times you physically touch your phone, every tap, every swipe, and you will be alarmed. In fact, I would guess you'll quit, because it's so many times, you'll just be like, oh my gosh, I'm at 28 already and it's been 2 minutes. This is too much. I mean, that's addiction. You know, the word addict actually comes from a Latin word that at the time of Jesus, that word was used. It was a legal term used in the Roman courts whenever a person was deemed a property of another person. So essentially, when a person would enter into slavery, the word from which we get the English word addict, that was the word they would use at the time. So an addict essentially means a slave. We are enslaved to technology. So I think it starts there. And I don't say that to strike fear. I actually think that's the most hopeful way forward. Be honest about your level of addiction to your devices. Once you've done that, my suggestion would be a life without limits is enslavement. This is sort of backwards thinking in culture today. We think that if we could live without any limits and we could just do whatever we want to do, that's real freedom. But what is actually true in the Bible and in what secular science is revealing to us is that limits are actually the path to liberation. They've done all sorts of research, a couple famous ones just up the road from here at Stanford University, where they'll take young children and put them on two different types of playgrounds. One playground has a very clear sort of small fence, like a boundary line, like this is the playground, play inside this playground. And then they'll put the same kids in another playground with no boundaries, just like an open field with structures and stuff. And what they have discovered, they've run this study several times over many years. What they find is that every single time, the kids who play on the playground with clear boundaries run free within the boundaries of the playground. And they play with exuberance and joy. The kids that they plop into the boundaryless playground actually get really paralyzed and they end up playing just in one area and they don't really move because limits are liberation. We find our deepest freedom in creating clear boundaries. Here's what I am going to do. And here outside of this, outside the bounds, I'm not going there because it's not safe. It's not healthy. It's not good for me, all those sorts of things. So I would say, after you have done an honest assessment of your own digital addictions, potential addictions, then create limits. Create limits because you will find freedom in those limits. So just in my own life, some of those limits, again, I've deleted basically every social media app from my phone. It's not that I don't have social media, it's that I can't access them in my back pocket. If I want to go on Facebook or Twitter or whatever else, I have to actually open my computer, type in the URL, log in, and it's like a big, long process. I think one of the reasons we are so addicted is because our apps are so easy to get to. And I think creating barriers to make it harder, less convenient to access them, is one of the healthiest limits we can create. So I've done that, and that's been really helpful. I have time limits on digital interaction. So the charging station for all of our digital devices in our home sits in our kitchen. So our digital devices are never in our bedrooms or in the living room or the playroom where the kids play. They just don't go there. And so there's a physical limitation on where we allow digital technology. And that's been really helpful because it allows us to, again, freely engage one another in analog, right, as human beings. Another one, this one I got from Andy Crouch in his book, The Tech-Wise Family. My wife and I treat our smartphones. We try to treat our smartphones the way we treat our children, meaning our phones go to bed before we do, and they wake up after we do. So the phone is not the last thing I'm looking at when I go to sleep. I'm typically reading a book or talking to my wife or something. Occasionally I'll watch something on TV, even though that's digital, it's at least not social media. And then we wake up before our phones do. So again, because my phone is it's not on my nightstand, I don't wake up and open social media or my news app first thing in the morning. I wake up and make a cup of coffee and spend some time with the Lord and the scriptures. So anyways, those sorts of limitations have been really helpful for me and helpful for other people in my life as well. And I think those limitations actually have created a life of freedom.
Hmm. Honestly, the most challenging one having teenagers is the no phones in certain zones of the house. It's really hard. Like, I guess I
Yeah.
just want to acknowledge that it's really hard. And it's hard when people in your home start getting older and they start developing their own opinions
Mhm.
about what they see as fair and right and what they don't. And I guess I don't know if there's any more than that, than just acknowledging like this is a constant challenge. And then in every season, we have to revisit these challenges.
Yeah, that's good.
Mhm. Can I make a confession on my own addiction? So
Please, Alex.
I don't
We're
know
a
if you-
safe space here. We're a safe space.
I just to normalize with people. So I was at a basketball game, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I saw a girl sitting next to me that I kind of knew, that had a limit on her screen time for a particular app. So I said, "Oh, will you set this up on my phone? Because I want that. I don't want to be on Facebook more than 15 minutes a day." Well, what I didn't realize until the first time I hit that limit, which was like 15 minutes later, is that there is the opportunity to say, do you want to skip over the limit? So
Right.
for 2 years, I've been skipping over the limit.
Mhm.
And I realized I have this need, and I think there is a little bit of a practical element to it. Having 4 kids at 4 different schools, I want my kids to be able to get in touch with me when they are away from our house. And so I feel this need to have my phone with me all the time. And I decided this is a time sucker, for one. It's not a good use of my time. But as you mentioned, it's not good for me to constantly be reaching for my phone because it's my go-to, because I'm addicted. So this is going to sound so ridiculous, but I got an Apple Watch for Christmas. It was the one thing I asked for because I wanted to be able to get texts in a way where I would not be tempted to get on social media because it's just too small. It's too tiny. And I'm not tempted at all. And I'm trying to figure out how to work the watch and all that. But I got more technology in order to help me with my addiction to other technology. But what I was trying to do is I was trying to really be honest with myself. My underlying desire is for my kids to be able to reach me in an emergency, or even not even like an emergency, just can you pick me up? And so I wanted that, but I didn't want to continue the way that I had been operating the last few years. And so I'm really trying to be intentional about how I use my devices. And I realized carrying my phone around has become normal for me. I am that person 2,600 times a day. I don't want to be that person. So just for listeners to know that they are not alone if they're feeling convicted right now, I am in the struggle with you, and I'm trying to figure out a way to use technology so that my kids can get in touch with me, and my husband too. Like I have my people that can break through. The other thing is Krista has do not disturb. You can see when other people have do not disturb on their notifications. And I'm always like, why is Krista on do not disturb? But then I thought, okay, but she's smarter about this stuff than I am. So I'm also trying to use that too, and have certain people be able to break through, my kids and my husband.
Well, what you're not saying is you just set them as emergency contacts and they can break through, and they do break through.
Right.
Yes.
So I want people to hear that. Like, it doesn't mean do not disturb on everyone. It just means do not disturb for the rest of the world.
Right.
That is trying to notify me about everything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's so good. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay, go ahead, Krista.
Okay. Well, so this is also helpful. And I do think, one other thing we can do is just say to people, if you really need to get in touch with me, call me. Like if it's an emergency, call me, don't text. And then the calls come through because they're emergency contacts. So just another tip. Okay. Well, Jay, what would you say? Like you are mentoring a whole congregation and you are trying to help, right? This whole idea of formation. I think I want to come back to that whole idea. of formation, and that we don't realize this stuff is forming us. And when you say it in those terms, that wakes me up, just like the product thing woke me up. Like, I really do care about how I'm being formed. Like, if my end goal at the end of my life is to be more like Jesus, to be wiser, to be more loving, and right, I have this like big picture goal of what I want to be, that daily formation is huge. And so can you talk to us a little bit about, so if we don't want that forming us, what are some ways we can be formed differently? And how do you encourage people around you to lean into those kinds of formation?
That's a wonderful question. I'll, for the sake of brevity here, I think I'll reference and then recommend a resource. A dear friend of mine named Brett McCracken, he wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Wisdom Pyramid. And what he does is he takes the food pyramid. You guys remember the food pyramid from, elementary school and middle school? You need like grains and fruit and all this stuff, and then ice cream is like at the top, not because it's the best, but it's like the smallest, the tippy top. It's like, okay, so if you reverse the food pyramid, what it means is if you eat ice cream and potato chips, 3 meals a day, which I would love to do, by the way.
Yeah.
If you did that though, and you ate vegetables, once a month or something, and, your body is going to be formed in a particular way that is not healthy. So he takes that entire concept and talks about our sort of mental, emotional, spiritual diet, what we consume, not physically, but what we consume mentally, spiritually, informationally, and so he does the same exact thing. And I think that's what I would recommend, assess your diet. If social media is the thing that you consume and ingest the most, if you're spending, 4 hours a day scrolling Instagram and TikTok and Facebook, well, that's going to form you. It's just as if you were eating one particular type of thing 3 meals a day, whatever that thing you're eating, that's going to form you in a particular way. So that's what I would say. Consider your information diet, what you are consuming mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And it's not to say it, unless you have real significant health issues, I would never say that, like our kids, like we don't let them eat ice cream for breakfast every morning, but do we let them eat ice cream? Yeah, of course, of course, from time to time and as a treat or dessert, or whatever. We don't let them eat it 3 times a day, but we let them eat it. And what we do ask they do is drink a lot of water every day and have their vegetables. And, so I think thinking about it along those lines might be a helpful and very accessible approach. So what are the things that I need to consume emotionally, mentally, spiritually, that will form me into the person that I think God has designed me to be? So that might very well be, okay, how do I get a little bit more consistent in time, with my time in God's word? How do I get a little bit more consistent because this isn't just about like what you read, I think that's what a lot of people think. It's like, how do I get a little more consistent in spending meaningful time with meaningful people in my life, where we can actually face to face as much as possible? Maybe it has to be on Zoom because it's your best friend who lives in another state or something. Okay, but how do I get intentional about that? Okay, like once a month, I'm going to commit and get I'm going to be disciplined about it. Hey, every last Thursday of the month for 3 hours, let's get together and just go on a walk, have a cup of coffee and just check in, or meet on Zoom. Like maybe on Sundays, like, okay, I'm going to prioritize my life and just get more consistent about showing up to church and being with my people or my small group or whatever it might be. Maybe it's replacing an hour's worth of podcasts on your drive in and to wherever during the week. Replace that with an hour's worth of a meditative prayer app or music that's inspiring to you or gives life or joy to you. So I think that's been helpful for me, sort of assessing my information diet and then adjusting it in such a way that what I consume is going to work toward me becoming the sort of person I think God longs for me to become.
Hmm. I think of it in terms of, I've always said it this way, that I know the things that ground me and I know the things that don't ground me, that actually send me into a place I don't want to be. So even like when I'm outside, for example, gardening, working with my hands, like there's something about that that just grounds me. Like I feel it. Like I feel this is good for me.
Yeah.
And then there's other things I'm like, this is not good for me. So we do a little bit have that intuitive sense, don't we, inside of
Yeah.
us that knows.
Right.
I would love to hear, Jay, just even personally, what are things that ground you?
Mm. So much. Obviously time with Jenny. She and I just got away for our 14th anniversary, went up to a small, sleepy little town north of San Francisco called Sausalito and stayed in a bed and breakfast that we love up there. So obviously just time with her that's quiet, especially in the season we're in with young kids. Anytime the kiddos can sleep at grandma's house for a night and Jenny and I can just be adults is always such a joy. So yeah, so we have monthly date nights where the kids go sleep at grandma's house, which is awesome. So we're like militant about upholding that and just sticking to that. Gosh, so much. I don't get to do it as much anymore, again because of young children and stuff, but I love going to museums, art galleries, and art showings. I love live music. So I've got a couple of shows that I'm going to in the next couple of months that I'm really excited about. One of our date nights is actually to a concert up in Oakland. So that's going to be like a double whammy. So those
Who's
things
the
are,
artist? We just have to hear.
it's a band called Michigander.
Okay.
They're kind of like an alt pop band from the Midwest, and then a singer-songwriter named Abby Holiday who's opening for them. And I love both.
it.
So I love it when I love the opener and the
Yes.
headliner. So that's
So
going to be a blast.
good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so art, music, I'm a diehard Bay Area sports fan, so that's always fun. And then hiking, our family tries to hike. It's raining now, which is very rare here in my part of the world, but we try to hike every Saturday, take the kids for a short hike. And so I love that. I just love getting away from the hustle and bustle of Silicon Valley culture and being in nature a bit and being with the family. So there you go.
It's so good. It's so good. And I just keep thinking about, how do we intentionally, because if we're not doing it intentionally, there's no static, right? We're
Yeah.
either kind of falling in a direction we don't want to go, or we're growing intentionally in the direction we do. And so even just hearing those examples, I think is really helpful, because we can say, okay, how do I intentionally, like, okay, Jay, I like that idea. I'm going to put a couple of concerts on my calendar in the next couple of months. I'm going to schedule to go to a museum on a date night. You know what I mean? Like it's helpful to hear those things, because then we can think, how do I intentionally incorporate that into my life?
Yeah. Right.
It's great.
Yeah, I like what you said there too. For Jenny and I, this is advice we got during premarital counseling 15 years ago. This older couple that was counseling us, one of the things they said that we have stuck to for 14 years, they said it's really important that you never have a period of time where you don't have one or two or a dozen things you're looking forward to together as a couple on the calendar. And it may be really far out, but you've got to have those things. And they gave us a bunch of reasons why. So we've stuck to that. And it's been such a helpful exercise in so many ways to have something that that we've planned together, that we're looking forward to together, and that we could talk about and sort of like work on together sometimes. So Jenny and I right now, we're taking our kids to Chicago in February. I have a ministry thing I'm doing out there. So we tagged on like 3 extra days, and I'm just going to take them to the snow in Chicago, and it's going to be freezing and they're not going to know what to do because it's so cold. But we're so looking forward to it, and Jenny and I are like looking up restaurants we want to go to and different things. So it's been, even just having something to look forward to together has been such a great exercise in sort of removing us from the chaotic allure of social media. I think that happens a lot when we're bored. We don't have anything else to do. And so keeping yourself not distracted, but and not preoccupied, but focused on the things that matter most and on the relationships that matter most, I think is a really helpful exercise.
You know, the way I say it is be in the story, don't watch the story.
That's
like,
good.
you know,
Yeah.
be in the story, like create your own story. Don't just be watching other people's stories. I
Yeah,
love
that's
that.
good.
That's such a good piece of wisdom. I love that. And research backs that up, that new experiences bond people. And so I can't remember who did this, who did the study, but they've shown in research that that is true.
Wow.
That the more new kind of fresh experiences you can have, you don't just like watch a movie every time and go out to the same place for dinner, that you actually do new things together, and that's bonding.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, Jay, this has been a fantastic interview. Thank you so much. What would you just say as kind of final words of encouragement?
Yeah. Well, thank you both for having me on. It's been a joy. Yeah, I would just come back to what you all said at the beginning. There's no fear here, right? Perfect love casts out fear, and you are loved. You are loved, and you are not only well loved, but you are deeply loved in a way that you cannot possibly imagine. God loves you. He is for you. He has good for you. And the more and more we can fix our eyes on him and position ourselves to receive his love and then extend that love out back to him and to others, the more and more we can do that, the more and more we are going to find ourselves becoming the people, the men and women that God has called us to become. And when we focus our energy in that direction, what we begin to realize is, oh, this isn't a struggle because I am saying goodbye to social media or something. It's a joy because I'm actually reorienting my life toward the things that matter most. And so that's my hope and prayer for everybody listening, that you might find deep joy and meaning in the things that matter most, that you are well loved by God himself and by so many, and that you have love to give. And and as long as you can do that, life will be infused with the sort of meaning and purpose that is just beyond explanation, beyond words.
Thank you. Can you give us the names of your books real fast, so if readers are wanting to look them up, they can find them? Listeners.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for asking. The first book I wrote is a book called Analog Church. That was a book that was written primarily for church leaders and pastors. But my most recent book is called Analog Christian: Cultivating Resilience and Wisdom in the Digital Age. And that's a book for everybody. So it's just about this conversation, how we cultivate the fruit of the Spirit in our lives in the midst of all of our digital distractions.
Love it. All right. Happy New Year, Jay. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.